Welcome to the Create What You Speak podcast. My name is Sloane Freemont, and I'm your host. This is the show where we talk about changing our lives through changing our thoughts. And every week, I bring you different guests where we have different conversations about perspectives, ways of looking at the world, and how we can really start to make those changes internally to move towards the life that we want to live. And today I have back a friend of the show, Dr. Erhard Vogel. Dr. Vogel, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Sloane.
So glad to have you back here. And for the listeners who, if this is your first time hearing my conversation with Erhard, I'll just give you a brief background on him, and then we're going to get into it because we always have a lot to talk about and there's always a lot to say and the time goes fast.
Yeah.
So Erhard is recognized as one of the foremost meditation and self-realization teachers in the world. He is the founder of the Nataraja Yoga Ashram in San Diego. And if you've listened to our conversations in the past, you know Erhard's teaching method might be different than what maybe you're used to. His philosophy, and if I say this incorrectly, Erhard, please correct me, but it's more of the teaching to know rather than teaching for someone to hear. So your approach is getting people really interactive in what you're teaching, and so they can experience it in their own life. Would that
Right.
be
So
true?
the experience is the key word.
Yeah.
Because I feel the only way that you can know something, not believe what something else, like I say to my students always, don't believe a word I'm saying.
Right.
You need to know it. Because
Right.
belief, you can be misled. People are misled by false beliefs all the time.
Right.
But when you experience something where you can say, yes, I know this is so, then you've got something. And so my teaching is more done as a way of stimulating the experience of what we're talking about. So it's also a two-way or an interconnected event. It's not only I am speaking, but you are speaking with me, right? We're speaking together
Yes.
and we're experiencing together.
And we're in the moment, right? When we have these
Yes,
conversations, we're in the moment. We're not 5 miles down the road trying to think of the next thing to say. We're actually experiencing
exactly.
each
Yes,
other. And
yes,
that's what we invite the listeners to do as well. When they are listening to our shows, and this goes for anything, but we're talking right now about the show, actually experience this conversation with us.
yes, exactly. And then it's not just something that you file away in your mind. It's something you have within you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so you like sometimes I have students who want to take notes of things that I say in class. And I say, no, don't do that. Don't do that. Experience it. Then you have it with you. You don't have to memorize things.
Right.
Just it's in you, you know. And that also then stimulates, if it's in you, it stimulates you to live accordingly
Yes. It
and
fills in.
act accordingly, conduct your life according to the knowledge that you have gained.
Yes. To me, that feels like settling in. What we discuss settles into me. And it's not
Yeah,
like you're saying, it's not a note-taking memorization school type task. This is real life, right? Real life is
yes,
experience. And
yes,
that's how I think that's how we understand ourselves. That's how we understand each other. And that's how real change happens.
yeah. And then, the thing is, in life, most people don't live in the moment as you were just talking about.
Right.
Because most people tend to live in terms of what they are, whatever the circumstances and conditions are, those stimuli take their mind and their feelings and emotions outside of themselves to those stimuli, and then you respond to those stimuli with your feelings and your emotions and with your mind. You
Right.
respond to those stimuli. Yeah. So you can do all of that and not relate it to yourself at all. It's almost like you're not involved. It's only your mind and feelings and emotions may be involved, if that. I had somebody today speak to me about not knowing what feelings are.
Interesting.
And so actually, we talked about that last week too. And I told her to, look up what the dictionary says about feelings.
Right. Right.
And I probably shouldn't have said that because she came with all kinds of notes and had written down like feeling sadness or frustration or joy or so, but she didn't know what feelings she had.
Interesting.
And that's not uncommon.
I had somebody ask me this week if my feelings drive my behavior. And I said, absolutely. And I didn't really think that there was any other way to live than being driven by my feelings.
Do you still feel that?
Sometimes I do. Yeah. I feel like my feelings,
Then you're in trouble.
depending on, I mean, but sometimes the feelings are good feelings and those good feelings are carrying me. And sometimes the feelings are not good feelings. And then those are the ones that pull me back.
Right. Your feelings can mislead you,
Mm-hmm.
you know. Um, and I'm not saying not to feel your feelings,
Right.
but there is a stance that you can take where you can experience your feelings and just experience them and don't have to then do what those feelings indicate.
Yeah.
Like
Not get
you,
swept up in
you
them.
could, you could feel sadness, but you don't have to drag yourself through a sad day,
Right.
you know? Uh, you can be with the sadness and be okay with it and let it be, then it'll work itself through. But if you become obsessive about that sadness, you'll be repeating it with the experience of it within yourself over and over and over again and make that the modality for you.
Yeah. And so what I realized with feelings, like let's say sadness or grief or whatever you might be experiencing, those in my earlier days, I would have tried to escape those types of what I would call negative feelings. I would have tried to do whatever I could to escape the feelings.
Right.
And as I've gotten older and I've experienced sitting with those types of feelings as they go through, as the waves go up and down, I found that experiencing the feeling, whatever it is, negative in this case, perceived negative, not, I don't,
Good distinction,
yeah,
because I always say there are no positive feelings and there are no
right,
negative feelings. They're just feelings.
right. And sitting with those feelings and letting those waves come and go. And like you're saying, not always getting caught up with them, letting them be what they are. It felt like to me that they then go through me. They're not locked in or stuck in me. They're going through me, and it may be waves of that back and forth, but having that willingness to sit there with those feelings, as uncomfortable as they are, was a much better experience than trying to fight them off.
Very good. I really agree with you. We have there's something that I call the silent observer,
Mm-hmm.
where you do what I think what you were just talking about is you just sit there and be open to any feelings to flow through you, but you don't attach yourself to them.
Yeah.
So that's why it's important also to have no classification of positive and negative feelings. They're just feelings. You let them flow through and don't hold on to them.
Right.
And then they go through you and they achieve what they're there for. And then you're open for whatever else comes next in the next moment.
Right. And that living in the moment, as we talked earlier, being here, being present, because in that resistance to those feelings or wanting to escape the feelings, you're so far from the moment, right? If I was doing that, I was way down the road trying to get to a different place or hurry up and make this happen kind of thing, which brought on, all kinds of other feelings on top of the one that I was trying to get away from. And
Right.
the person that you were talking about that said that they couldn't feel then? That's interesting to me because I feel like I have a lot of feelings. So in those situations, maybe where listeners can relate to that, where they don't feel that they can feel, is that from pushing feelings away for so long? Is that from what could you talk a little bit more about that? Because that's new to me.
Well, okay. It, yes, it, you, the thing is, why would you push feelings away? Because they are a very rich source of experience, aren't they? Yeah.
Right.
But it starts with that classification. These are bad feelings. These are sad feelings. These feelings hurt.
Yes.
That's the thing.
Yes.
The, First of all, everybody has feelings. Even
Right.
this person who doesn't know that she has feelings. Of course, she has feelings, but she has adopted the pose of automatically uh, canceling them out,
Mm-hmm.
not acknowledging them, not wanting to experience them, because she's afraid deep within, people are afraid that they will hurt so much that it's going to tear them apart. They cannot bear it.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It's going to hurt them so much, right? Yeah. So, like she was saying, well, it started when I was 10 and my father died, whom I loved so deeply. And she to came into the room, into the house when, when he was dead, and the family were like, some were crying and they were upset and so on. And she couldn't figure out why they were so upset because, well, somebody told her that, a family member told her that her father has gone somewhere. He will be back eventually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so why is everybody so upset? She believed that,
Okay.
um, and and it stayed that way. Even when she knew he was dead, she still had it in her that he will be back. He's just gone away for a little while. So this is totally contrary to the facts of the situation,
Right.
right?
Right.
And that's what we do. Our feelings are meant to be a response, how we are responding to a certain situation,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's a natural response if a loved one dies that you are upset, that you're sad, that you're hurt, and so on. But when you deny that, you're tying your it's like you're chaining yourself to the feelings that you're denying so that they're always with you.
Yeah.
And you have to keep on denying them.
Yeah. And that
And,
energy of the denial and even
yeah,
even that, like you mentioned, the assignment of the meaning of the feeling.
right. And so here's another point that comes with that. In order to assign the title to the feeling, like this is a sad feeling, this is a feeling I don't want to have, how do you know? Well, you have to feel it,
Right.
right?
Right.
And then only then can you deny it. But so if you don't want that, you have to deny all feelings before you can identify them.
Right.
So that's how you have a person who doesn't even know what a feeling is, let alone that she has feelings.
Right. Right.
And that's really sad.
Yes, and I imagine a very difficult way to live life because you're it's in constant battle with yourself, and I would imagine that's very exhausting to to live that
Yeah.
way.
Well, it's a well known fact that many people are out of touch with their feelings.
Right.
Wouldn't
Right.
you say?
Oh, for
I
sure.
would say probably a majority.
Yes, I totally agree. And
So
I
that's how that happens.
right, and it's almost, I don't know, I guess it depends on maybe how people grew up, but it's often encouraged to deny your feelings, right? Let's say like a corporate work environment, right? Keep the straight face, don't show any emotion. Maybe some
Yeah.
people's families are like that, right? Some people have that. Maybe we're taught that in school in various places. So the denial of feelings, that cultural, I think, way of being is very common, and it shows up in so many ways that we don't realize, I think. And so I'm glad we're talking about this today with feelings and with, and I'll take it back to what we talked about at the beginning about why we're here and why we do these conversations, right? We do these, you and I have these conversations to bring this knowledge to people who are ready to hear it. We have it to, I think, explain this in a different way. So if people want to start participating in life, the things that we talk about here are how you do that.
Right. So this last part that you said is to me of cardinal importance, that you apply this knowledge to the way that you conduct your life.
Right.
So your actions, conducting your life is the action of your life, so that all of your relationships and so on are infused then with the richness of that knowledge. Because otherwise we are living in a very superficial way.
Right. And I know I've talked about on here my experience with experiencing it in our conversation and knowing it is that feeling in my body when I feel the loosening, or I feel my stomach unclenched that I really didn't even know that was clenched. And as I go away from our conversations and I think about this in my life, it starts to change the things that you do. You do things differently when you start looking at life this way. And that is how change happens, right? We don't continue on the same path that we are and expect for change. We have to do something different. We have to look at us, whatever it is, a different action has to be taken. And so the things that we talk about here, and I think what we stress and what we encourage for everybody listening is to start applying this in your own life and see how that changes, see what that does for you.
See, I see this as consciously involving yourself in your own evolution.
Right. Yeah.
Right? So evolution is not a passive thing that we just, to some degree, it happens to us whether we agree to it or not. But the evolution that we're talking about as human beings, we're capable of consciously engaging and involving ourselves in our evolution.
Right.
And we've got something. Then we are fulfilling the reason for being human.
Right.
Because a cabbage head can't do that, And a lot of humans live like as if they had a cabbage head above their shoulders.
That they do.
And in their chest.
That they do. And it's amazing to me that people do. But again, why we're doing this is to encourage participation. And so I want to move into what I wanted to kind of, everything our conversations always go so many directions, which is why I love talking to you. But there was a pearl of wisdom that you sent out last week, I think. And if for the listeners who aren't aware, Erhard sends out a pearl of wisdom every week, and it's usually a very short but very succinct statement that has so much packed into each word. And I like having conversations about those because they're so again, another way to experience to know. So this one was, they run away from the light and mistake the ensuing shadow as their identity.
Yeah.
They run away from the light and mistake the ensuing shadow as their identity. So this kind of goes along with what we've been talking about with experiencing ourselves, but maybe we could start in that statement. What does light and shadow mean in that statement?
Well, I guess you could say light is the conscious experience of being, and shadow is to be in the darkness of ignorance regarding yourself.
Right.
And, try sometimes to ask your friends to define their being, their real identity, and you'll get weird answers. You'll get, amongst the most prevalent answer is usually, "Are you okay? Why are you asking such a question?
Why are you asking me that?" Right, exactly.
Well, it's the most important question, because how can you conduct your life for you? Because isn't your life supposed to be for you, right?
Yes.
Oh no, that's selfish, people will say. That's the excuse usually. So what you're presenting then to yourself is to other people in your lack of selfishness is you're presenting somebody who you're not.
Right.
Because
Right.
you're not in, if you're not in touch with who you really are, you cannot relate to somebody in that ignorance as the real you.
Right. And like you were mentioning, the person who had denied their own feelings and was at a point where they thought they couldn't feel anything, if denying our own selves, our own light. I know I've been through this. And again, it's a process, but I think many people also don't know the real version of themselves. They don't know who they really are. There's so many masks and so many layers on, trying to show up in certain ways as they feel like people expect them to. And so when we start to peel those off and instead of moving away from it, start moving towards it and
Yeah.
wake up to who we really are. Um, that, I mean, that movement towards that, because there is that, I guess, if you haven't done it, if you've been in your own shadow and it can feel scary, it can feel overwhelming, it can feel all of these things. But as we mentioned, change is how
Yeah.
you,
Can I just insert something here?
yes,
The fear is not due to the light, it's due to being in the darkness.
right. Yes.
But
Yes.
we think that we get afraid when the lights get turned on.
Right. Yes. And that movement, I guess what I've noticed in my own life is we want changed, we want to change, let's say any sort of change, but we don't want to do what's required of the change. And it's required for the change. We have to do something different. We have to, like we were talking about, take different actions, there has to be something different. And
Want, Wanting it is not enough.
right, right.
You got to respond to that want, And but like we have an open house every 2 months or so, and I usually end up saying after I've talked to them for the evening,
Mm-hmm.
I usually end up saying, "May you value yourself sufficiently to
Yes.
do something about this, to find out who you really are, because the grand majority of people don't know who they really are."
No, and that was in my notes. I was actually what I was going to bring up next, because that was one of the key, when we first started talking, that was one of the key statements that you said that woke me up to where to how I wanted to experience myself. And it it's one of those statements that gets you at your own attention, because I think most of us will think, well, of course I value myself sufficiently. But if you look at your actions, if you look at what you're doing, if you look at, are you living the same day over and over and over again, saying you want something to change, but nothing is changing, right? You have, like you said, you have to want it, and to want it,
You have to do it.
right. And yet there has to be an action involved. And we talked even last
Yeah,
month about the title of the podcast, Create What You Speak. You and I, our conversation last month was about that, about
right.
what that means, but then also that action portion of that, right?
Yes,
Putting it into action.
right.
And I think when we need to start paying attention to those kinds of questions that we're asking ourselves, not just saying, yes, I do value myself, when we're having some interaction, or we're listening to something like this, but then you go off and 99% of your time you live your life in the opposite of that.
Right, right. So wishing and wanting and is not enough,
Right.
because if you don't take action, it's just fantasizing.
Right.
And fantasies are not reality.
Right.
That's why they're called fantasies,
Right.
you know?
Yes. And that movement towards the light, movement towards that true
The
version of
life of
ourselves. Yes.
consciously experiencing.
Yes.
It's kind of redundant because it's just saying being conscious. But
Yes.
the root of consciousness is to be in the experience of you being, right?
Yes.
Because if you're not experiencing that you're being, then the root of consciousness is missing, and you can be experiencing the weather and the words and all the circumstances and conditions, but if you're not relating it to an awareness of being, then that stuff is just out there.
Right.
Your
And
experiences are just out there.
yes. And so bringing that back in, that I think all of our conversations so far have been, I mean, it hasn't been said in this way of, you know, moving towards the light, but that's the purpose. That is what we've been talking about on
Yeah.
pretty much every episode that we've talked about. And that shadow that I think maybe most people are so used to being in, that ignorance of themselves as maybe a form of protection, or maybe maybe just they don't know, right? Or maybe they just have never heard it. Who knows? There's many reasons, but that moving towards the light, that consciously experiencing ourselves is I feel like, at least for myself, and I think if people are listening to the show, they're probably feeling the same. Like, I'm at a point that I can't not do that anymore. I can't
Right.
live in that shadow. I can't live in that ignorance of myself. I will not
Right.
tolerate it for myself.
Right.
And
Right.
when you take that stance for yourself, when you make, it's like you put the stake in the ground and say, I'm not living in that shadow anymore. I'm not doing it. I am moving towards my light, my conscious experience. It felt for me, and I made that decision a while ago, and it's still an ongoing process, obviously, but it felt to me that making that decision and calling that and claiming it helped some of that fear fall away. It didn't feel as like it didn't, the shadow didn't feel it had the power over me like it maybe had previously. I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes total sense. In fact, I would say, if when you're successful with the pursuit of real experience that brings real knowledge, the shadow becomes eliminated.
Yeah.
You don't you don't have to work on that for the rest of your life. You can stand up and be decisive and say, okay, I'm going to find out who I am, and that's not difficult.
Right.
Like with my program, people they are secure that they know who they are, and it's not just wishful thinking. They know who they are. Then it's just a matter of enacting it, putting it into action, living it.
Right.
Having that be the the foundation of all of your experience has to be consciousness.
Right.
Consciousness is the awareness of the being that you are, not the awareness of a false idea regarding yourself. You
Right.
know,
Right.
and the thing is, when you even when you begin working on this, and it's not something that happens automatically. It doesn't happen even through a lot of experience unless you direct the experience and focus the experience according to you. You know,
Right.
um, circumstances and conditions will not do that. Sometimes a very intensive experience may shake you up, and usually people then discover, God, I better do something about myself,
Right.
right? And
Yes. They
they
hit rock bottom, and yeah.
they make their New Year's resolution in July, if it happens in July,
Right.
but then they don't follow through. But you need to follow. If you do follow through, that's where the joy of life comes in.
Yeah.
That's where you feel that you're a creative participant in your life now. And
Yes.
you become rock solid secure, because once you have the experience of self, the real self that you are, I write it with a capital S, not the little ego self, you
Right.
know, once you're in touch with that, you're absolutely secure no matter what the circumstances are that will come to me. I will always have that. I have the security of being in the knowledge and the conscious experience of myself every moment. So even if something either tragic or painful or so happens, I have that.
Right.
And and it doesn't mean I deny what happens out there, or even what happens in my heart. I don't deny it, but I have that security that of the being that I am, which is the constant, right? And with that, I can take anything.
Yes. And when you're talking about that living in our light, in our having a conscious experience, and once you know who you are, and and you're rock solid in that, then to me, it like what comes to mind is it's like a daily tending to that, right? It's a
Well, you
daily.
don't actually you don't have to tend to it anymore because you're living it. You're you're living. You're continuing in consciousness, in
Yeah.
awareness of the being that you are. So
Yeah.
whatever you do is related or comes forth from that awareness of the being that you are. And therefore there's balance, there's constancy. And with the lights on, you don't run into walls anymore.
Right. Right. That's exactly right. And what a better way to live, right? What this living in the shadows, maybe listeners are experiencing that now, living in the shadows and living and have for some time. I know what that's like. We all do. And that conscious choice to this is no longer for me. I will not stand for it. There's so much power in that if you're willing to do it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's like if a blind person were to know of sighted persons who go through life with a black blindfold on all day and all night, every day and every night, that blind person would say, "What the heck is the matter with you?"
Right.
Right?
Right.
But that's how we are if we are not in the light of consciousness.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly right. And we've talked about on many of the episodes, I think, about being engaged in this, in our with our lives, with ourselves, in this consciousness, because then we start to understand, tying it back to what we talked about with feelings and these internal signals that we might get, this guidance system that we have inside of us. Then we know what those things mean for us. We're not trying to escape them. We're not trying to push them away, because we know those things are parts of us and they're there for a reason. They're there for, as part of us, to help us on our journey.
Right. In fact, that's how we fulfill our meaning, but through the experience.
Yeah.
Because look, is life meant to be for us to be comatose in?
No,
Of
absolutely
course
not.
not.
No.
So comatose is to me the opposite of experience,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know really if somebody is totally without experience when they're in a coma because sometimes they register things. But the way we think of as coma
Yes.
is like
Yes.
you don't experience anything. You're like dead except your body is still alive.
Right.
You know? And so our life is not meant to be not experienced, but
Right.
it has to be experienced in terms of us experiencing it. And if we're not in touch with who we are, the experiences don't come to us. They come to a false idea that we live with of who we are, not to
Yeah.
us,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's the biggest tragedy.
Yeah.
Life is meant to be experienced. So the meaning of life lies in its experience.
Yes. And think about, I think about in my own life experiences that I've pushed away for various reasons. And it wakes you up to yourself with that, that um, experiences are meant to be experienced. That's life. And I
So
think
yeah,
that,
so it's I should modify what I just said because it's not just in its experience, it's in your experience of yourself in this life.
yes.
Because you
Yes.
could experience trees, mountains, weather, talking and all that, but if you don't relate it to yourself, to your awareness of yourself, then it's just outer experiences that vanish the moment they're over.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, this week we've been talking about all kinds of things. We've talked about feelings. We've talked about moving towards the light of our own consciousness, moving out of the shadows. We've talked about other things. I can't remember. We've been all over the place kind of today, but this has been a very good conversation.
But it's all been about the same thing, hasn't it?
Yeah.
It has
Yes.
all been about us valuing ourselves
Yeah.
sufficiently to take hold of our life and give it to ourselves.
Yes. And experience that.
It.
Yeah, exactly.
Experience ourselves in it.
Yes. And so we asked this last month, and I'm going to ask it again to the listeners. What are you currently doing? What are you currently doing about it in your life? Do you value
Yes.
yourself sufficiently? And if you say yes to that, then what are you doing to experience yourself? What are you doing? And we want to hear from you.
You're doing that. You're doing something very important, Sloane. That is, you keep on bringing it back to the point. Yeah, you can say yes to all of these things and still not do anything about it.
Right. Right.
That's how a lot of people do it. I have a little side thought. When you mentioned the pearls of wisdom, and you describe them as like a succinct thought, right?
Yes.
Presented,
Yes.
and with a nice picture, because I like pictures.
Yes.
Photographs I've taken all over the world,
Yes.
well, not all over the world, but many parts of the world. And people can receive those by email if they send in their email address.
Yes.
You can send it in to you or to me, so you can give them those links, right? And or they can see them on Facebook, under my name.
Yes, and I'll link to that in the show notes for the listeners to find that easy. So yes.
Yeah. Okay, that was the side thought.
Yes, and I would encourage everybody listening to sign up for those because, like I said, very succinct, very, and the pictures are amazing. But they always, I mean, for me, I'm left with thinking more about how can I experience myself more? How can I experience myself? And I think those doing things like this, like having those kinds of reminders, that's an action somebody could take, right? Sign up for to get the pearls of wisdom and actually read them and reflect on those and see what that means for you, right? See what that means in your own life. And so when we talk about, and as you said, when I ask, what do you, because you can say you want this, you can say you value yourself, you can say a lot of things, but the next question I'm always going to ask is, what are you doing about it? Because there are so many ways to consume information that is not like what we're talking about today with experiencing it, but it's often it goes in like, one ear and out the other kind of. That's and there's no benefit to it. And the information that we're talking about today has significant value if you're willing to do something. So each week I'm going to keep reminding, or each month I'm going to keep reminding the listeners and asking, what are you doing about this? Because it's important, and it's why we have these conversations. It's why I do this show, is to help people do exactly what we're talking about on here and wake up to themselves. Wake up, go towards the light, stop running towards the shadow and move towards the light, and see how your life changes. See how experiencing yourself, see what that does for you. Completely different way of being.
And then experience how life becomes not only lighted, but light. You become lighter. Your life becomes more graceful and more smooth because you're not working against yourself anymore.
Right.
When you're in denial of your existence by not experiencing it, then you run into trouble all the time. That's the cause of our suffering.
Right. I think we did.
That's a big statement to make, that somehow our suffering is rooted in the denial of self-experience.
Yes. And maybe we'll pick up on that topic next month, because I know we've talked about it before, but I think that's always worth revisiting, that impact that suffering has and what it does to us, and in understanding our choice in it as well. Yeah. I think.
It just occurs to me, would you allow yourself to drive the freeways every day in unconsciousness?
No.
Why not?
Well, it would, I would, first off, that would be very dangerous, and who knows what would happen. And it would likely cause death because you had no idea what you're
Exactly.
supposed to be doing.
Right. So you can, so that's my analogy for going through life
Yes,
in
yes,
unconsciousness.
yes,
Now, when we're driving, we can relate to a little smidgen of consciousness to accommodate the driving, you know, to it without accidents and so on.
right,
But for life, we don't even do that.
right,
Many people don't even do that because you can't be aware of being when you don't know who that being is.
right. Exactly. My guest this week has been Dr. Erhard Vogel, author of A Dialogue with Death, The Teacher of Life, an ancient story for the modern world. So, Erhard, as we close out today, what's one thought you want to leave with the listeners today?
Everything that we said.
Yeah. Go back and listen again. I think this has been a really good conversation that's worth a second or third listen because there was a lot here today.
I had one thought while we were talking, which is taking action, right?
Yeah.
Uh, when I read for my own enjoyment, my own entertainment. And I never read just words. To me, they're just vehicles of experience. So I experience whatever I read, I experience, unless it's some boring directions for a device or so. And I usually don't read those. I have
Yeah.
somebody else read them and then tell me because I don't like them. But anyway, so I experience. So my books, my students, like Dialogue with Death, The Teacher of Life, they read that book over and over and over again. They've read it dozens of times, even though it's a big book. And the smaller ones, like Journey into Your Center, which is kind of like a series of interrelated essays about just the practicality of being you, you know?
Right.
Those books, like they have been read so many times, they're frayed
They just
around
fell
the
apart.
edges.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And they still get something new out of it
Yeah.
every time they read them. They're very rich, they're very full, but also very understandable if you tune in, you know.
Yeah. And I'll link to that. I know I've linked to the Dialogue to Death book, but I'll link to all of your books in the show notes as well, so the listeners can easily see what those are. And I think that pointing that out of even listening to this conversation again, you're going to be in a different place each time you listen to it. You're going to have had different experiences, and you just never know what insight might come if you're willing. Again, if you value yourself sufficiently and you're willing to take action.
Yeah, and you know, part of the action in terms of what we are doing here would be, wouldn't it be nice if our listeners were to respond to us?
Yes.
They could write to you, text to you, or whatever, and respond to what they've experienced through our podcast here, you
Yes.
know, and
Yes.
or ask questions and ask for more elaboration on certain things, and or tell what difficulty do they have to understand this or that, or how do they want to cope with that. I wish we had like almost a call-in
Yeah.
show, right? But
Yes, that would be nice. I wish I could. I'm not sure how I could pull that off, but that would be really nice to do, to have people call in. And that's a really good point. I mean, we definitely want to hear your questions. Anything you want us to expand on, or if you want to share your own experiences, you can always email us. My email is sloanefremont@pm.me. I'll put the email in the show notes, and you can also comment on any of our social media. Any questions you have, any comments, we read those. And last month we had a comment that we expanded on in the show. So we're always open to that. So please do take action. Like we've talked about today, take action.
yeah,
and move yourself forward, because when you're willing to do that, when you're willing to step up for yourself and do that kind of stuff, and then you hear our response, you're going to open up even further, and you're going to keep opening
right.
if you're willing to do that.
Yes, good, good.
Yes. Well, Erhard, thank you again for joining us. As always, it's such an amazing conversation each month when we talk.
Well, it's easy, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, it is.
It's
It
easy.
just flows. It
Yeah.
is.
Well, and I enjoy speaking with you. You have many good ideas, Sloane.
Thank you. All right. Well, you've been listening to the Create What You Speak podcast brought to you by webtalkradio.net. You can also hear the podcast on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and your favorite podcasting platform. I'm Sloane Freemont, and I hope you'll join me for the next episode of the Create What You Speak podcast, where we will continue to free our minds, expand our consciousness, and untangle those thoughts and patterns that keep us from living the life we desire. Check out my website, sloanefremont.com, to learn more.